turn on the recording. Okay, another tool that you will see in your toolbar is the raise your hand. So let's just see if everyone can find that one. If you could raise your hands for me, please. Excellent. Let me just lower your hands. Okay. So as usual, this one is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel. There will be today a little bit of audience participation, and there will also be some time for you to have a little bit of self-reflection. But pretty much let's get started. Okay. So this week, this month, this year, across our city, our country, the world, in seminar rooms, in lecture rooms, and in meeting rooms, people are slowly boring each other to death, bullet point by bullet point. There is a better way. It has to stop. Welcome to the revolution. So today you may think that I'm going to be talking to you about PowerPoint. I'm not going to be talking to you about PowerPoint. What I am going to be talking to you about is preparing your message, preparing your materials, and preparing yourself. So the first thing I'd like you to do is I'd like you to take a minute or so just to have a think about what you believe is wrong with presentations. So just have a little think about, and if you like, you can type something into that Q&A panel as well and tell us what you think is wrong with presentations. So think about a presentation you have been to recently that was less than stellar, and just think about why it was. For those of you just joining us, we're just having a think about what we think is wrong with presentations. So if you have anything that you'd like to share, you can feel free to put it into that Q&A panel. All right, so before I started working at the university, I ran my own business, and one of the things I did was help people create presentations and really help them to get their message across. And one of the things that I did when I did that is I would actually go around and do a little workshop for people, or it may be that I was doing a presentation myself. So I've run workshops over 3 days, I've done 1-hour presentations, all sorts of things. And pretty much I was doing that, say, twice a week for about 5 years. And I asked this question, and every single time the top 2 answers I would get from the audience would be too much text on the slides, reading slides. So people really dislike the fact that there's normally too much text on the slide. People are reading the slides. There are all sorts of other things that used to come up too, like bad and unnecessary animations, bad text, busy slides. There's just too much information in the whole presentation, technical glitches, they would come up. But every single time I did this, too much text was always number 1 or number 2. So I would imagine that a lot of you came up with that. So let's just have a look at a typical slide. So raise your hand if you've seen something like this recently. Oh, Ali's raising her hand. Yeah, I can see most of you raising your hands there. Yeah, this is pretty typical. You know, that title, bullet, 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 logo, title, bullet, 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 logo, title, bullet, bullet, logo. It's electronic chloroform designed to put us to sleep. Okay. This is very typical. It's what Gar Reynolds, now Gar Reynolds writes Presentation Zen, which is the most read presentation blog on the internet. He's also written a couple of books, and he calls this a slidument because it's neither a slide nor a document. It is a slidument. And essentially what somebody is doing here is they are trying to turn their slides into their handout and their own notes and a visual aid. It can't be all three things. This is not good enough to be a handout. It is not detailed enough. Essentially, this is the speaker's notes. And, you know, as an audience member, it's not my job to read your notes. It's your job to read your notes. Please take them off the screen. Okay. Now, cognitive load theory also tells us that people cannot read and listen at the same time. If you try and read and listen, you take in less than if you either read or listened. So you may have noticed when I put this slide up, I stopped talking. There is no point me trying to talk over the top of this slide because as soon as it comes up, you will want to read it. You can't help it, you're curious, and so you read it. And if I try and speak at the same time, your brain just goes too hard. Right? I've got things coming in. Essentially, I've got two things coming in the same channel. I find this fascinating. It's the only time our brain works like this, which is when it changes one sort of stimulus into a different sort of stimulus. So when you're reading, your brain actually perceives that as an oral message. It doesn't perceive it as a visual message. It's a bit like you've got a voice reading out loud to you in your head. So if I then speak as well, I'm overloading your oral stimulation. Okay. As I say, you would be better off, if you want to do this kind of thing, is putting this up on the screen and going to the pub, because your audience will learn much more that way. Okay. So how do we avoid doing this? Well, let's look at those three steps: the prepare your message, prepare your materials, and prepare yourself. So let's start off with preparing your message. Now, I'm sure that my wonderful audience today would never ever dream of, when they heard they had to give a presentation, firing up PowerPoint and starting to type. I'm sure none of you have ever done that. And I'm glad to hear that, because if you ever did think about doing that, what I would say to you is stop. Okay? Stop what you're doing, step away from the computer. Before you start even thinking about preparing for your presentation, there are three questions that you have to ask yourself. The first question is, who are your audience? So think about who your audience are. Are they people who are within your own field of expertise? Or are there people who will not understand any jargon that you use? What is the educational background and the socioeconomic status? Are they there because, what kind of age range are they in? So just really think about who your audience, spend a lot of time thinking about your audience, because they are king. It's all about them, it's not about you. Okay? So that's the first thing to really spend some time thinking about. The second question to ask yourself is, what is the context? Okay? So how long have you got? That's a big one to start with. How long have you got? There's no point writing an hour-long presentation and then trying to fit it into a 30-minute slot. You cannot just talk twice as fast, even if you'd like to. So how long have you got? Is this a small meeting? Is this actually a lecture? Are you going to be standing in a room that has got 400 people in it, or is it more of a sort of sales pitch, if you like, to 2 or 3 people? So have a think about what is that context. If you're speaking at a conference, are you first thing on the first morning, or are you first thing in the morning after the big party the night before? Are you just after lunch? Please hope not. Or are you, on the last afternoon when people have already started to leave or hit the pub? So think about what that context is. And again, things like, is this voluntary or is this mandatory? Is this health and safety training? And then, most importantly, what's the point? Now, that seems like a fairly obvious question to ask yourself about your presentation, but you'd be surprised the number of presentations that I've seen, and I get to the end of them and I go, what was the point in that? And if you don't know what the point of your presentation is, then your audience certainly won't know what the point of your presentation is. So it's very important to think about that. So how do you think about what's the point? Well, one of the ways to look at it is to think about what success like. So when you get to, as you're walking out onto the stage, at the end of it, in a week's time, in a year's time, what does success look like? What does it smell like? What does it feel like? So really think about that. I did some coaching for some teams that were in an incubator, a new startup incubator called Innovise Start, which is sponsored by the ANZ, and they get to give a 6-minute pitch at the end of this 10-week period in the Adelaide Town Hall, and there are investors, angel investors brought in, about 400 angel investors brought in from across Asia and Australia, and they get to do their pitch. And so I went to them and said, what's the point? You might think, well, the point of that is to get people to give you money. I'm like, what, you think after 6 minutes someone's going to walk up with a checkbook? It doesn't happen like that. So you need to think deeper than that around that, what's the point? As I say, so for them, success felt like they had a queue at their table after the presentation and that sort of thing. So really think about what's the point. And I must say, I have worked with some academics, and this is something they really struggle with. Because of the nature of what you do as an academic, it can be very difficult to try and pin down like one or two things, because you have such wide, there are so many things that you want to say about your research. So really, I have worked with academics in the past and they struggle with that. Salespeople find that really easy question to answer, but academics do struggle. So I would really advise you to spend a lot of time thinking about that before you move on to the next part. So that's the 3 questions to ask yourself before you even start. Then what you do is you start to create your outline. So an outline is the thing to spend your time on. If you were going to use the 80-20 rule, I would say spend 80% of your time working on your outline and only 20% working on your actual building of your materials. So I'm just going to walk you through the 3-step process that I use when I'm creating an outline for a presentation. So the first step that I do is I brainstorm. So I start to think about all the possible things that I would like to talk about in this presentation, and I write one thing on a post-it note. So this is all about brainstorming. Remember, brainstorming is about idea generation, not idea critiquing. So at this point, I'm not really thinking about will I include that or won't I? I'm just thinking about every single thing I might want to say, and I'm putting it on a single piece onto a single post-it note. And you might want to use brain mapping software instead. But as I say, I'm a physical person, so I like to use my post-it notes. Step 2, step 2 is really hard, and step 2 hurts. It hurts and it's hard. And step 2 is culling, because I cannot possibly talk about every single thing that I want to talk about. Yeah, I can't fit my 20 years of knowledge and experience of presenting into a half-hour presentation. It just can't be done. So what I do, how do I go about culling? Well, again, always keeping in mind what's the point, who are my audience, what's the context. I prioritize those bullet points, so those post-it notes rather. So I take the post-it notes and I put them into 3 piles. What the audience need to know, what I would like them to know, and what it would be really nice if they knew. Okay, so what do they need to know? What's the essentials that they need to know? What do I want them to know? And then what would it be really nice if they knew? So essentially, I'm taking my post-it notes, my messages, and I'm prioritizing them. Okay. So then my 3rd step is that I then create a structure. Okay. So I take those need to knows, I take those really important points that I've got to get across, and I put those into a structure. And this, if you like, is the bones that I'm then going to hang my presentation off. Now, there are all sorts of different structures you can do. Some handy ones are things like a timeline. So if you're going through a process, you might start at the very beginning and work your way through to the end. And please do that from the audience's point of view, not your point of view. Okay, so think about it from the audience's point of view. You may have some methodology that you would like to talk through, so there may be that you can structure your presentation around that methodology. A really great starting point is a 3x3 structure. So our brains love threes. I have no idea why, but they do. They really respond to threes. We find things in threes really easy to remember. So a 3x3 structure is essentially I've got 3 main points and I've got 3 things to say about each of those points. Okay? If you've got longer than that, you may say I've got 3 main points and I've got 3 subpoints and then I've got 3 things to say about each of those subpoints. But stick in that structure of threes. It's a quick, easy way to build a structure. It also helps you. It helps you to remember if you've only got 3 things to say. That's quite easy to remember. So build up that structure. So that's the 3 main steps. Is I do that brainstorming, I do a bit of a cull, and I build the structure. And it's after that that I can then really start to flesh out that outline. So this here is a real piece of work that I did. This is for a course that, a day-long course that I ran at PCE for a while around avoiding death by PowerPoint. So if you're looking at this picture here, along the top there, I've got a yellow row, and that is that structure I was talking about. So that's like the bones. Below that, I've got some color coding. So below that, I've got the green stuff, and that's my topics. That's, if you like, that's my subtopics that I want to make sure I'm including in that main structure. Below that, I've got some pink ones here. So I've got these little ones here, and that's what I've called them. So they were exercises and things that I wanted the audience to be doing. Below that, I've got these blue ones here, and that's me. So that's what I'm going to be doing. That may be like a particular slide or a picture or a story or an image or a video that I want to use. You'll notice it's very heavy with me at the beginning. That's how these things tend to work. And then I've got whole bits where I just don't do anything at all. Me. And then finally, along this bottom, I've got these purple ones here. And that's really important because that's my timings, because I have to remember to stick to my timings at all times. To say I can't fit everything that I know and everything that I want to talk about into a 2-hour presentation. So you may notice up at the top of the table here, up in that top right-hand corner, that I'm still culling. Even at this point, I'm having to cull because I have to stick to those timings. So that's the structure that I use when I am creating my presentation. So there's one more thing that you need to prepare in your planning when preparing your message, and that is to have a really strong start. So you want to make sure that you've got really think about your beginning and your ending. So it's great to have some kind of hook. And I know a lot of presentations start with, hello, my name is, I'm from this place, this is how long I've been doing this thing, and so on. The problem is nobody really cares. What you need to do is answer that what's in it for me question as early as possible. You've got to grab the audience's attention. You do not have many seconds in which to do that. So grab their attention, and then you can do the hello, my name is bit after that. Okay. And one of the things you can do with grabbing their attention as well, it's really good if you then return to that at the end. So a little peek behind the curtain for you. I started off with that little bit that I spoke about, you know, across the seminar rooms and lecture rooms and meeting rooms, people are boring each other to death, and rah, rah, rah. I will return to that at the end. It will be slightly changed. And the reason for that is what that does is it creates a little bag. So it closes the loop. So you start with something, if you return to it at the end, it closes the loop, and that creates a little bag for the content of your presentation. And people are more likely to remember the content of your presentation if you have closed that loop. So it's a really good way to help people with that memory. So how do you start? You may tell a story, you may have a startling statistic that you want to use. I know someone who starts with a song, which is, you know, fairly brave, but if you're up for that, then you could be up for that. But just make sure that you're starting with something very, very strong. So now now we have got our plan, we've got our outline, we are ready to start preparing our materials. Okay. Do not confuse your slides with your presentation. I think this is a big issue. This is a big problem. This is what leads to title, bullet, bullet, logo, title, bullet, bullet, logo. Is people confuse the slides that they produce with their entire presentation. Your slides are your backdrop. They're the scenery. Your slides are not your presentation. Okay? Your presentation consists of the visual aids, so the slides, or maybe props, or videos, or diagrams, or anything like that. It may be a whiteboard. I've seen some really great presentations done with just a whiteboard. Anyway, that consists of that. You also then have some handouts, and then you have yourself as well, and you have the audio track that you are adding to the scenery. So please don't confuse your slides with your presentation. I think that is the biggest issue that we face when we go and we see bad presentations. So what are your visual aids there for? If your visual aids are not your handout, and your visual aids shouldn't be your speaker notes, what are your visual aids actually for? So your visual aids should help your audience understand and retain your message. Okay? So they should definitely be used for aiding that understanding and helping people remember things. If your visual aids aren't doing that, get rid of them. If they're not doing that, they're not doing their job, so don't bother using them. Now, normally around this time, I get people looking slightly panicked because everybody loves having their speaker notes on the screen, because then it's really nice and easy to see them. But that's really about you. It's not about your audience. Remember, your presentation, it's all about your audience. It's not about you. So how do you overcome that? Well, I'm not sure if any of you will have seen this before. Do you want to raise your hand if you've seen this kind of view before? Nobody. That is not surprising. As I say, I've been doing this kind of thing for years and years and years, hundreds and hundreds of times, and I have seen people raise their hand about every other time. I maybe have one person raise their hand. This is one of PowerPoint's best kept secrets. It is called presenter view. Oh, someone's raised their hand. Yes, excellent. So yeah, this is called presenter view. And essentially what you're looking at on the screen here is what you would see on your laptop. So on your laptop, you have the ability to have things like what the time is, you've got your notes area, you've got what's coming up next, you have the ability to go in and actually move your slides around. And what your audience is seeing is this big part of the screen here where you can see the finger with a knot on it at the moment. And that's what your audience is seeing. So speaker notes are really handy. You can make speaker view is really, presenter view is what it's called. It's really handy. You can see, and you can change, all of these are push me, pull me's, so you can make the slides smaller, you can make your notes area bigger, you can make the text in your notes area bigger so it's easier for you to read. So that's really handy for you. If you won't have the ability to have both screens, you can print off your notes as well. So you can print your notes with the slides at the top as well. So that's one of the printing options for PowerPoint. So really please take your notes off the screen and put them in the area where they should be, which is the notes area. Clues in the name. All right. And while we're here, I'm sure you have all read the text because you're humans, you're curious, you can't help yourselves, so you will have read the text. But yes, using an appropriate image is really great for increasing people's retention and increasing the learning. And as you may be able to see there, that a visual with text or a visual with text and audio narration is much better. So having an audio narration and a relevant visual is the best way to get your message across. Sounds a bit like a presentation to me. Okay. The other thing to do is put notes in the speaker notes area and use presenter view or print out those. The other thing is to put it in the handout. Get it off the screen, put it in the handout. So the handouts are there to help your audience to remember the information, your major points once they've left. So what you want there is, please don't just print off, you know, those ones where you get 3 slides and then the little lines next to it so you can write your notes. Yeah, please don't bother with that. Instead, create these handouts separately, and it should be where you can put your main points as a reminder. It's where you can put references. It's where you can put that really detailed piece of information. So that beautiful 600-point data chart that you've got, you can go in the handout and you can have a simpler version which gets your message across as an actual visual aid. Okay? So put your detailed stuff in your handouts and also a good summary. All right, time for a bit of audience participation. Everybody, I want you to raise your finger. Okay? Raise one finger in the air. Okay? Okay. One slide, one idea. If you only remember one thing that I say today, let it be that. So please just put one single idea on a single slide. Do not put multiple ideas on a single slide. Why is this useful? Oh, this is useful for so many reasons, not least of which it means you can reuse your slides. So if you just, essentially what I've done here is I've taken what would normally be the title of the slide and I've made it the whole slide. And what would normally be those bullet points I've put in the notes area or, in my head. And seeing as none of you can read my head, well, I hope not, you don't know how many bullet points I've got. So one of the great advantages of that is that I can adapt my slides for different audiences. I can also see how my audience is reacting and I can move on faster. I can also look at the time and go, oops, I'm running behind. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to skip a bunch of stuff and the audience don't even know that. So one slide, one idea. What it does as well is it really helps you to focus on what's the point. Like what are your important messages? Because giving a presentation is about getting your message across. So it really helps you focus on what your important messages are, and it helps your audience as well. Distracted. We've all got busy lives, we've all got stuff going on. We suddenly remember that email we were supposed to send. We suddenly remembered it's somebody's birthday at the weekend. We start thinking about the shopping we've got to buy on the way home for supper tonight. All sorts of things. And people, they'll glaze over, they'll look out the window, and then they'll go, oh! And when they come back to you, you want to make their job as easy as possible. So your job as a presenter is to make the audience's job as easy as possible. Don't make them struggle. So if I had lots of bullet points on the screen and somebody comes back, they're like, oh, which one's she talking about? Oh no, I don't know what she's doing. And then their brains go too hard basket and they stop listening again. In this case, you know what I'm talking about. I'm still discussing one slide, one idea. This is probably a good point as well to show you that. So it's really important that what is on the screen behind you or to the side of you supports your message. Remember, it's the scenery. It should be there to support your message. If it doesn't support your message, and this may happen perhaps if somebody asks you a question, is you can blank the screen. So I did that just by pressing the B button on my keyboard. So if I press B, the screen goes black. If I press W, the screen goes white. I find that just a little bit too glary. But yeah, so, and that's really good for if somebody's asked you a question that's not completely relevant to what's on the screen. So any of those people who fade away and then they come back to you, they're trying to go, hang on, wait a minute, but what you're saying, what's on the screen are different. And guess what? They think the computer's more intelligent than you do. So they think you're the stupid one. So it's quite a good thing if someone's asking you a question, as I say. Also, if you're telling a story, and we are storytellers, people respond to stories, they remember stories. So stories are really important. You should read the book, Make It Stick, by Chuck and no, it's gone. Sorry, I think Ali's going to look that up for me. They do a great thing at the beginning of their book where they give you a bunch of stats and then they tell you a story. And at the end, they don't tell you they're going to do this. In the end of the chapter, they go, which can you remember? I could remember the story. I couldn't remember any of the stats. So we are storytellers, but making the screen blank while you tell a story allows people to be far more engaged. Because they have a picture in their head about the people you're talking about the images, about the things that's going on. So if instead you have images up while you're telling a story, it makes it much more passive for the audience. It's a bit like the difference between reading a book where you're using your imagination and watching a film where you're pretty much sitting there passively accepting that. Okay. So we need to think about some alternatives to bullet points. So if we're not going to be using bullet points, what are we going to be doing instead? So obviously there are images, there are charts, there are diagrams, you could use videos, you could use props. There are all sorts of things that you can do instead of bullet points. You can still use text. I mean, essentially here I still have text, but you treat text as an image rather than treating it as text. I did actually use bullet points earlier when I said that we were going to, well, the 3 things that we were going to talk about. So when I said that was the prepare your message, prepare your materials, and prepare yourself, that was actually a bulleted text slide. So your brain may not have registered it as that because I didn't have a title, I didn't use bullet points, and there wasn't a logo. So there are lots of things that you can do instead of bullet points. Okay. I have a tip to give you. If you're going to be using images, I have lots of tips on lots of things, but one of the tips that I would give you is if you are going to be using images, make sure you've got the right to use them. That's one of my tips, but really my main tip is go full screen. Okay. There's a really massive difference between this slide and this slide. One of the issues is I find a lot of people do this is they have an image and it's on one side, or it's just sort of floating around, and it's way more powerful if you use it to fill the screen. I think one of the things is that people never look at their slideshows in slideshow mode. Always look at your slideshow in slideshow mode, because when you are editing, you've got all of that editing stuff around the sides of your slide, so you can't necessarily tell when you're editing that the difference between this slide and this slide, because they kind of look the same when you're editing. So do make sure you look at it in slideshow mode. A big tip for you as well is look at it in slideshow mode and then back away from your computer, so you can see more what it looks like for people who will not be sitting right next to your computer, people who will be sitting towards the back of the room, and so on. What you can also do with that is I've then got some space there for some text, so I had a little bit of white space where I could put some text in. I've also picked up the blue of the man's shirt to tie the text into the picture. Okay. One other thing I would say about your materials is be prepared to present naked. What do I mean by that? Well, be prepared for your laptop to decide it doesn't want to talk to the projector today. Be prepared for your video that you've embedded not to work. Be prepared for there to be a power cut. Be prepared. Oh, I did hear a wonderful story about a man going and presenting in a beautiful old castle in Ireland, and he walked in and he was looking around going, where do I plug my laptop and my projector in? And they went, oh no, we don't have electricity here. So be prepared. The more you're prepared, because computers, bless them, they do know how much prep you've done. They know how important the meeting is. They know how much, how soon it's supposed to start, and they act accordingly. Okay, so the more prepared you are, I find the less technical issues that you have. But also, you know what? It's kind of fun to do so I'll just be clear. I was about to say it's kind of fun to present naked. What I mean by that is to not have slides. So what I mean by presenting naked is presenting without slides. It can be really empowering. And it's one of the tips that I give clients if they're a bit nervous about how do they go about using the kind of slides that I'm encouraging them to use. Is actually the first step to that is to present with no slides at all. And what happens is they then tell their story. People are normally pretty passionate about what they're talking about, and they're really good at telling their story. If you meet them at a party or something like that and you talk to them and you ask them about their research or whatever it is, they get really passionate and they really talk. But then as soon as they start using PowerPoint, they get all formal, and particularly if they've got bullet points, they feel obliged to read the bullet points out. And that just stiffens them up. So it's much better to just have a go with presenting with nothing at all, and then you can start introducing in some of these other ideas. So that's preparing your materials. And finally, let's talk about preparing yourself. So how are you going to go about preparing yourself? Rehearse, 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 rehearse. Now, rehearsal involves speaking out loud, and preferably standing up. Going through your presentation in your head is not rehearsal unless you're planning on giving it telepathically. So make sure that you rehearse, stand up, and speak out loud. Now, when I rehearse, I make sure that I stand up, I have my computer there, I have a pad and a piece of paper, a pad of paper and a pen. And when I rehearse, if I want to make any changes, either to what I'm saying or to something to do with the images or the slides that I'm using, then I will make a quick note. But what I will do is I will carry on. It's really important to rehearse from beginning to end, because otherwise you will never get to the end. You will just keep doing the beginning bits, and you'll get a little bit further, and then you'll get a little bit further, but you'll never actually get all the way to the end. And sometimes when you get all the way to the end, you realize why you made the decision you made earlier, and that you don't actually want to change it. Okay, so you may actually start to think about, well, no, I don't want to change that thing I thought I wanted to change at the beginning. So rehearse from beginning to end. And how often should you do that? Until it really settles down, until you're really comfortable, but probably end to end 3 times. That rule of threes again. The exception to that is the first 5 minutes. So the first 5 minutes, you should make sure you know really well. Now, I don't mean learn it line for line, because that can get you caught out if you forget a word in the middle, but know it really well. And the reason for that is to do with our fight or flight response. So you may have noticed this in speakers that you've seen, or you may have noticed this in yourself, is that at the beginning, they talk like that, and they talk really fast, and they're all talking in the throat, and they're not talking from the diaphragm at all, and they're getting really, really, really nervous, and then about 5 minutes in, they suddenly start to relax, and they just feel a little bit more like themselves. Then they just relax into their presentation. So that's, as I say, it's to do with that fight or flight response, that little part, that really animal, lizardy part at the back of your brain that is waiting for somebody to jump out of the audience and come and stab you. It's waiting for the saber-toothed tiger to jump out from the wings. And it's really about it not being used to that situation. It's not happy because it's not used to what's happening to it. So the more you can get it used to what's happening to it, the more relaxed you will be. Okay? So if possible, go and rehearse in the actual space. Certainly visit the space if you can, so you know what it's going to be like when you get there. And if you know those first minutes really well, then that little part of your brain, that animal part of your brain, will not take over your higher cognitive function, and your higher cognitive function can just carry on doing the talking. Okay, so know that really well. Right. And while we're talking about that little lizardy part of your brain, raise your hand if you are nervous when you are giving presentations, or nervous at the idea of giving a presentation. Yeah. So when we're nervous, what does that feel like? Do you get that butterflies, you get the sweaty palms, you get the shaky knees. By the way, that's about whether you're a fighter or a flighter. So if you get that shaky knees kind of thing, that means that your body's preparing to run away. If you get more of the sort of itchy palms and that sort of nervous energy, then that means that you're more of a fighter. You're getting ready to have a go at someone. If your brain isn't sure whether it wants to do either of those things, it just goes into complete meltdown if it thinks it wants to do both at the same time, and that's when you freeze up. So that's what it feels like when you're nervous. What does it feel like when you're excited? Pretty much feels the same. Hey, you get the butterflies in the stomach, you get the knees knocking, you get the sweaty palms, you get the dry throat, all of those sorts of things. So that's one of a really small little trick that you can use with your own self-thinking is, am I nervous or am I excited? And you can help your colleagues with this as well, because when you talk to people about presentations, our usual dialogue around that is like, oh, you're giving a presentation. Wow, you must be so nervous. Oh no, I could never do that. Oh no, what if you stuff up? Right? That is not helpful in any way. Instead, think about how excited you are. Think about, and I say this to people like, wow, that's really, you're going to go and speak to the board. That's amazing. That's so exciting. You've got an opportunity to get your message across to these people and change their minds about things. That is so exciting. So in your own mind, just make that switch about, I'm not nervous about this, I'm excited. I'm excited that I have this opportunity. The audience want you to succeed. The audience are on your side. Okay? So treat it as a little bit of excitement. Okay. So that brings me to the end of what I wanted to talk to you about today. I'm just going to wrap this up and then we'll do the sort of formal wrap up of the webinar. We're going to wrap up this presentation first of all. So next week, next month, and next year, across our city, our country, the world, in lecture rooms, in seminar rooms, and in meeting rooms, there will be a few less people boring each other to death, bullet point by bullet point. You knew there had to be a better way. Long live the revolution. So, as you saw there, I just made a little bit of a change. So I started with that hook at the beginning. I changed it at the end, which hopefully has closed the loop for you all, and you will be able to remember some other things that I said. So we've got an opportunity now for a Q&A. I will just launch a poll as well, just to find out whether you found the webinar useful or not. And remember that, hang on, sorry, trying to talk and do things at the same time. There we go. Oh, by the way, that was just a quick keyboard shortcut there. I went back to the first slide by hitting the 1 on my keyboard and then enter. That took me back to slide number 1. So I've just got this. Yeah, we'll just wait for a couple more of you to get voted, get voting on that poll. Our opportunity, if anybody would like to ask any questions. Next one that we've got coming up is on MS Project, and please let us know what it is that you would like to see. So if there's anything in particular, any topics in particular you would like us to cover, then please just let us know. Okay. All right, I'm just going to close that poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Thank you, everybody. All right, I will just give you an opportunity to ask any questions that you have. Okay, I don't have any questions at the moment. If you are furiously typing a question, please raise your hand so I know not to end the webinar. But if nobody raises their hand, then I will be closing down this webinar and booting you all out. Okay, nobody's raised their hand, so I presume that means that nobody is asking a question. All right, in that case, I shall end the webinar. Thanks very much for attending, everybody, and we shall see you in a couple of weeks' time.